Good evening. Um, Here we are today again. Discover Design is back on a Thursday, brought to you by JS Institute of Design. And I'm Nain Xiao. I head the design academics at JS Institute of Design. And today we have brought for you a very interesting topic and an even more interesting speaker. So, our topic today is understanding lighting design. Um, the person who will be speaking to you is Manav Bhargava, a very interesting, experienced designer in the field of lighting. He's the founder of Mandala Design Studio um, and has many years of experience. So, we will be talking about a lot of work he's done and his insight into how lighting design lights up, literally lights up not only the interiors, but also the architecture. That is the portion of building which has many more interesting things to show today. Today, we just before we begin, I just want to inform you what Discover Design does. Discover Design is a series of webinars where we bring to you experts from the field uh, who who show their work, who talk about their experience of design, and many times the evolution of design as they have seen it through their experience and through their work. The most of the domain of design that we speak about at the moment is the space, the interiors, and today we bring to you lighting design in interiors as well as lighting for architecture. Uh, I would just want to remind you, in case if you have any questions, please put them down in the question and answer box, and we will be taking it up at the end of the session. In between, there will be ways in which we will be communicating with you and getting your opinions as well. So, Manav, I just want to be able to give a small background to what you have done because I do find it interesting that you did train as an architect and you have really now started specializing as a lighting designer. But just to give a small background to what else he's doing, he's also an educator and lighting designer and architect for 17 years, has worked as the principal lighting designer on more than 75 wide ranging projects. I mean, that's a lot for the number of years you've worked. And I'm really surprised there are so many more opportunities in this such a niche area of architecture. Let me also inform you about his idea of engaging people with an emphasis on context specific, narrative driven, socially meaningful, and ecologically sensitive approach. I do think it's very important for designers to be able to project their thoughts and their philosophy about their work. He's conducted workshops with governments, government agencies, given talks on various forums and conferences. And his workshops are about capacity building, developing and understanding of the role of lighting in the urban realm, and for holistic integration in the city planning process. Some of the major projects that has been undertaken by him include the Rashtrapati Bhavan, the Rajiv Gandhi Memorial. These are really, I think, significant projects that we see around us in our cities. He's a recipient of numerous awards. I can quite imagine because this is such a niche area, and from what I've seen of his work, I can tell you it is a very interesting domain at the present. So the awards that the awards have included 40 under 40 global lighting designers of 2019, as recent as this, which was instituted by an international program identifying the most talented individuals working in the field of lighting. So, welcome, Manav. We're really happy to have you with us today. And I would really request you to introduce a bit about anything that you have been doing. But just before you do that, I want to just state a bit of my understanding of where lighting has played a role in architecture. You know, in architecture, people experience light through the way they see light play with the building forms and structures. They may be natural or it could be artificial. Now, that creates some kind of an experience for them. But could you help us understand how did this how did this really evolve from traditional times to now? So the platform is yours now.
Thank you. Um, I think light has always been an integral part of architecture, and no architecture is ever complete without thinking of light. Uh, Even when you look at vernacular Indian architecture, we've had these architectural elements which have always engaged with light. You have
Mhm.
the chajjas. I mean,
Mhm.
these are elements, devices to control or modulate the amount of daylight that comes in. So you have chajjas. You have Roshandan.
Mhm.
Roshandan solves a different purpose from a window. We have the Haveli's typology. You have the courtyard, which allows the light to come in. So the formation of, the development of typology architecture is kind of dependent on daylight itself. We have jalis. I mean,
Mhm.
jali is such a magical device in my opinion, and there is no one kind of jali. The design of jali depends on the function that you want it to play with respect to light. And similarly, I mean, if you look at, and these are just Indian examples, but if you look at the Western uh, context, the entire the philosophy, ideology of behind the development design of churches and cathedrals, it was about letting light in. So the stained glass, the craft, the skill of stained glass evolved around light, letting light inside the building. Literally the enlightenment, as they would say. But interestingly, in Hindu philosophy, it's the other way around. When you go to a temple, going in from a brightly lit space to the Garbhagriha, which is supposed to be absolutely devoid of artificial light. So there, you need to keep in mind then how the architecture evolved, which helps transition from a brightly lit space to a dark space. And I'm sure everyone must have experienced this sometime or the other. You move from a bright space to a dark space. It takes your eyes at least few minutes to adapt. It
Mhm.
doesn't happen instantly.
True.
So the architecture would actually modulate the amount of light, help you adapt while you're moving from the outside to the Garbhagriha. And once you're inside the Garbhagriha, the only focus, the only light is that little flame which is lit in front of the idol. That's what brings in the focus to the idol. And the most interesting thing about Garbhagriha is light is one of the elements which creates the theater there. You have the prasad, which is for your taste. Of course, the flame is for your eye, the ghanti for the sound,
Mhm.
the stone, which is about the texture. So all your senses are activated. So effectively, it's a theater. It's an atmosphere that you create over there. And
Mhm.
light is one of these elements that helps you create the atmosphere. And atmosphere is not about the physicality of the space, it's the non-physical elements which define the experience and that moment in that space. So light for me is so integral to experiencing a space and
Mhm.
add to the atmosphere. So if I have to like kind of summarize, I think light is about I would say visuality, how you see what you see, defining
Mhm.
spatiality, defining the space, the physical boundaries, the extent, and of course also creating the atmosphere. So I think light is a completely integral aspect of your experience of your space, how you perceive it. And the perception, how you perceive it, depends on so many other factors as well, and vision being the most important element there. So I think
Right.
it's something which I feel personally it's a little underexplored,
Mhm.
and I think the advent of artificial lighting is where that break happens. The connect uh, was broken, but I think over last few years, decades, uh, things have moved in a different direction. We're just moving from a functional light source. We're moving towards creating artificial experiences using artificial light as well.
Right. So I was just wondering whether it would be possible for you to explain through some of the work you've done what you mean by that. What is that experience that we could show to our participants, and perhaps that will, I think, explain a lot of things. So we're going to
Sure.
share. I do think there are participants asking whether they can converse with you, but I would advise all the audience to please put in your questions, and Manav will definitely answer them at the end of the session. All right.
Right. So I'm gonna. Okay, my journey into lighting actually started. I'm an architect by education, and I happened to see a sound and light show, and I was completely messed. It was just a coincidence that I happened to be there, and I was completely mesmerized by the experience um, of the show. And in fact, there are certain parts of the show, the scenes. This sound light show was in Kurukshetra. It was about Mahabharata and the Gita, and there's certain scenes of that show which gave me goosebumps then, and even today, when if I talk about it, it still gives me goosebumps. So my introduction to light was there, and so and my journey into lighting started with sound and light shows. So I'm going to start with the shows itself.
Mhm.
This is the Amer Fort in Amer, just outside Jaipur.
Right.
This is a show that we had worked on about 10 years back, and it's a massive. I mean, you can see the extent. It's massive. It's about 200 meters across, and where you view the show is also about 100 meters away. This photograph is from where you see the show. So managing a site as expansive as this and with this undulating terrain, it was quite a bit of physical challenge. And if you look at the architecture, it's monumental. Literally monumental. Big facades, blank facades, hardly any architectural details, and very few openings there.
Mhm.
So this is one of the scenes that we had rendered for the show, where again the emphasis is on the bold architectural elements, not the fine details which normally you would witness in some of the Rajasthan palaces. And this is another view of another scene where suddenly there is a sense of celebration that's happening. All the elements get picked up. There is a glitter happening, and there's a cast of blue, which also kind of adds a little enigma. But a show goes through various ups and downs. It goes through its own moods. It goes through its own scenes, and using light to actually engage the viewer is the most challenging part. For us, turning this into turning the celebration scene into a depressive little um, neglected setting was a challenge. So this is how we actually achieved that. We got rid of all the white lights, the glitter, all the details, but cast a blue light with monochromatic blue light, which would actually cast deep shadows and make it actually seem like little distress, something which is left and neglected. So what I'm trying to get to is how light can actually change how you perceive an object. It has an emotional impact, and that's the potential of light that we try and engage and utilize during our shows.
I'd just like
Uh,
to ask you,
yeah.
when you designed this light display for a public, I remember I've seen the show. I remember a dialogue happening. I heard a lot of audio happening alongside. So it's probably a scripted version for that 1 hour or half an hour, whatever was the length of the show. So where does lighting come in? Does it happen at the end when the whole script has been written, sound has been added? And because I thought lighting was the hero of the show ultimately. But there was a narrative happening alongside. So who came first? Did the narrative depend,
it's
or did
uh, it's
lighting design depend on the narrative?
it's always the narrative that comes first, for sure,
Right.
because that is what gives you the skeleton. But there is a lot of to and fro structure, that to and fro movement that happens. Giving you example of this fort itself, when the script was written, we knew the limitations of lighting. We knew that there is not uh, the architecture doesn't provide a lot of exciting potential canvas for lighting. So we had to go back to the scriptwriter, who happened to be Gulzarji, and and he actually modified his script to suit the lighting as well. So there is a lot of to and fro that happens uh, in the entire process.
All right. Thank you. Please go. Please move on.
This is the aerial view of the fort. You can see the facade in front where the sunlight show happens. But we were also engaged as a second another project to light up the interiors of the fort, and you can see all these four courtyards which were to be lit. The idea was they were going to open the fort for night tourism, which included uh, people just walking through these courtyards at their own pace,
Mhm.
and they could be guided through an audio guide, and the lights being synced to the narration over there. And the third purpose was to open up the fort for events in the evening. So that was the brief given to us. I'm just going to talk about one of the courtyards, which is actually called Zanana Mahal. So this is where the queens, 12 queens of Maharana Mansingh used to stay, and there were 12 chambers around, and in the center, what you see is called the Baradari, the pavilion where all of them would come together. All these arches that you see over here, these lead to those 12 chambers. So it's a very interesting, complex uh, space. You have these private chambers for queens, yet you have a public space where they would come together to celebrate, to spend time together, and be part of a larger um, gathering. Now, for us, the challenge was how do we light the space to cater to all three of them? So, what we did was actually simulated the lighting for these spaces. If you look at this, these are all renders which were done on computer. So here you see there's a strong emphasis on the enclosure walls, the tall, high walls around, and the central Baradari also stands out as an object. This we felt had the maximum publicness to the space. The second scene that we created was kind of dissolves the boundaries, just have the arches, and then the object in the middle again stands out. And in the third, which I feel with only the lights inside the Baradari on and the edges, boundaries disappearing, became the most intimate scene uh, for the entire courtyard. And I, now it's so important to see, realize that how, again, the same structure, just changing the color, the intensity, the lighting, one is able to play with the speciality of the space and how one really perceives it. Here, it's a strong enclosure, much more public, little less public here, but here suddenly it becomes more intimate, and the entire focus is only on the center of the Baradari. And this is the final result that we created over there. Of course, we have the other scenes as well, but this is one which I had finally managed to photograph. From here, this is another project, but very different. In Amer, we saw the monumentality of the architecture, the blank facade, but here this is a small fort which was built for Akbar in Ajmer. And you can actually see glimpses of the intricate, delicate Mughal architecture details and elements in in the building. All the jharokas and the building, the jalis, everything intricately carved. So for us, the entire narrative, lighting narrative, changed to how do we express that? We take away the monumentality, break it down to elements, bring out the richness, bring out the the um, the glowing elements, and again have a sense of celebration in here.
Right.
Uh, this is a project which we recently finished last year. It's in Lucknow, the residency, and this is where this was a major center for the revolt of 1857. And the building is completely dilapidated, not barely taken care of. So one of the most interesting things for us to how do we pick up the texture, and you can see someone sitting there trying to figure out where to place the light. For
Mhm.
us, it's very, I mean, most of the time we don't have drawings. And to really understand how light works, you need to be at site, you need to be holding the light, see what it is actually doing.
Mhm.
And how it reacts to the surface, to material, and all the building itself. So this was the testing, the mock-up that we were doing. How do you bring out the texture of the building? This is also one of the testing mock-ups. If you see, I don't know if you can see these small holes in the building.
Mhm.
These are the bullet marks from the mutiny. And we were trying to figure out how do we highlight them? How do we, for a visitor who's going to be 50 meters away, how do we try and make these visible to them? So that was the attempt over here. And ultimately, this is another one of the scenes which we ended up creating. This um, again, from the building being a structure, here we are trying to express the skeleton of the structure, how it just arrived at its dilapidated form, which is we were actually just exploiting that to use to narrate the story.
So
This
I
project,
okay, sure,
yeah.
sure, sure. I want to see this before I ask you a question. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So this project also had projection. So there were two layers of lighting and projection. What was interesting was how lighting and projection overlay and come together to narrate the story. So even in this image, you see the projections on the facade, but the interiors of the building, there's a play of light happening. So this was a very interesting, challenging project for us to work together with the projection team.
Absolutely, absolutely wonderful. Because I've seen the residency during the daylight, and probably
Right,
was um, was affected by the story being narrated by a guide, and imagining, visualizing what it would have looked like. Whereas when I see the design of the light within this building, you almost immediately sense and feel whatever would have been the narration of that particular era or time, and you start feeling the emotions of the dread, the fear, the grief that enveloped this particular situation.
right.
So at this point, which is most effective for, let's say, a person who's coming to see the site? Is it at night with the sound and light show, or the daytime where you actually see a lot of things very clearly? So
Okay,
what?
I think there has to be a very diplomatic answer to that, both. So you can't miss the architecture during the day. It has its own. See, architecture, as I said, was always designed for daylight,
Mhm.
and especially all these structures. Okay, let me correct myself. It's not daylight. It's natural light.
Much. Okay.
One example that I'll give you is Taj Mahal. I don't know if it was designed for moonlight or not, but I think that's the magic of Taj Mahal. In a full moon night is spectacular. You can't miss that. So I think it's just the dynamics of the natural light and architecture is something that you cannot miss. Architectural light probably adds another layer to it, which sometimes can also be a little theatrical, as in this case. But I would say both.
I think so too. I feel
Yeah.
an interpretation by the sound, by the lighting design also is something really to look forward to. Thank you.
Right.
We can move on, please.
And this is, of course, another view of the same building while we were working on it. But this is a view from our camping site. We camped a tent there. We would work through the night. We probably spent about 10 to 15 nights working like non-stop. I mean, from evening, the moment sun would set till sunrise, we would be working. And we were just sheltered by this. And this is what our tent camp looked like. It was completely stocked with snacks, chai, coffee, everything. And it was January, so we also had potatoes being roasted on the heater. So that's the life behind working in these shows. But why I'm actually also talking about this is, you know, suddenly when we were while working, we realized there was this fog settling in when we were working on this show. We stepped out of our tents, and this is suddenly what our tent looked like, just one glowing lantern in the middle of nothing. Our surroundings were completely, the buildings just disappeared. And what I felt was the space, the void, which was earlier completely I would say we weren't aware, conscious of it, suddenly came into prominence. And this was just the interaction of the light with the fog. And the same building seemed suddenly like this. Now, for me, the building was completely, uh, it disappeared. It was just the space between me and the building where the dialogue was happening. And it's the atmosphere of the building, the space I was in completely changed. So it's the interaction between light and the material. Of course, in this case, it wasn't design, it was just default, but it was such a powerful experience moment to be there and experience this that I can never forget.
Sure. I think Manav, you make it sound so exciting. A lot of them would want to be perhaps be interning with you to figure out, is it really that exotic? The experience of
Well, I also showed all the hard work that goes behind it and the late nights.
right.
Now, extending from there, where we were talking about how the building disappears, the space disappears, and it's you're part of something larger. I mean, that's what for me, I felt it was a very extraordinary experience. And this is an exploration of similar idea, which was done quite a few years back. This was an art installation that we had created, and the idea was all this while when we talk about light, and in fact, one of the things that I spoke about was spatiality. How we define space, how do we define boundaries, and how do we kind of render spaces. But this attempt was actually about dissolving space. You walk into this space, which is, of course, limited by the physicality. It was, I think, about 10 feet by 10 feet, not nothing more than that. But how do we dissolve that space? We use this monochromatic light to fill the entire space so that the definition between floor, wall, and the ceiling is kind of blurred. But what you see as you come in is this mannequin in black, because when you enter a space like this and you can't see any details, it's very disorienting. So the black mannequin actually makes the focus, and what you see are these floating quotations on an acrylic sheet which were lit with lights on top. So you walk in, you see this black mannequin, and you see just these floating quotes, and you just walk around. So it is the idea was to turn this into a little bit of a mesmerizing 2-minute experience for the visitors and just make them forget about space. So
Right.
in what we called it was light and me. It was more introspective. It was more about being with yourself.
Since we have moved into the interiors, I want to put forward a poll questions for all our participants. And can we have the first poll question, please? I was wondering, do we have to?
Hi, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think there's a little bit of problem with Harshita's connection. Could you just give us 2 minutes to set up the poll?
Okay, so maybe we can move on then.
Sure.
Yes, let's move on.
Um, this is a project that we'd worked with Matra Architects. It's the Idea Sales Office, very unconventional interior design.
Mhm.
Uh, and it was in the Metropolitan Mall in Saket.
Right.
And the idea of the interior uh, setting was to treat it like an under construction site. And for me, the challenge was how do we light up a space which looks like an under construction site, yet being part of the mall. So on your right, you can actually see the high spec finishes of the mall, nicely brightly lit, polished surfaces. And for me, the most important thing was to create that contrast coming in from a when you're in this atrium, you see this cavity which is dark, it pulls you in. There is this inquisitiveness that brings you in. And that's what I was playing with.
Mhm.
And so we kept the interiors dark, yet what we wanted to do was bring out the rawness of the site. So if you see how these blocks are actually rendered through light, it's not flat light. All of them were treated like sculptural pieces in the space.
Right.
And the challenge, okay, I'll come to that point as well. So if you see here as well, another image where it's all the cavities, the negative spaces, the texture of concrete, because that's what brought in the rawness. If you see this lamp over here, it's that exposed, uh, the filament
Mhm.
lamp. I mean, in terms of the decorative elements as well. Again, pulling out the texture of concrete and the reinforcement bars on the left, if you can see. This was the door to the powder room, again made out of reinforcement bars. How do we pick out the texture? But yet suddenly you see this wash basin, which is made of a polished steel, um, and how do we bring in a sparkle there so that that contrast stands out even more? And for us, this was an extremely challenging project, not because of the thematic approach to it, but also while working on a scheme like this. I'm going back to this slide. We cannot ever plan this project on paper. It's just not possible. We don't know how to locate lights. So every single light over here was physically placed, marked. Then is when the cabling happened, and then lights were installed again.
Mhm.
So this entire project was about being at site and reacting to what you see at site and how you're going to address that. And
Talked of the challenges of designing for lighting and not really being able to do it on paper prior to going onto the site. We have a lot of software, the V-rays, and they are meant to actually help design lighting and to highlight certain parts of interior through this reflection of light. Do you think that works in the projects, these kind of projects that you're talking about?
generally, they do help. They help you visualize. Um, but there is a big challenge over there. One, you need to be very, very accurate and definite with the properties you put in for the lights and the materials, and also the rendering characteristics. So I would say it gives you a good sense of visualization, but I never rely on them.
Mm.
And another very important aspect to understand is our eye behaves very differently from cameras. Camera, our eye is a 10 times more, maybe 100 times more powerful tool than a camera. Our eye has this ability to keep shifting between different ranges of contrast. If anyone's familiar with photography, today we talk about HDR photography, high dynamic range photography. So what that is doing is trying to capture these different levels of contrast. So that's something that our eyes are naturally able to do and adapt. So what we see on through these renders will give you a good idea, but it's never going to be, in my opinion, it's never close to what I really see.
All right.
But we also use these softwares to visualize, also to calculate.
Mhm.
But you have to spend a lot of time at site, especially towards the end when you have, the site ready, you have the lights up there. That's how lighting happens.
Okay, so that's a good tip. And I just wanted to inquire from our fellows in the back end, is the poll question ready? If not, then we can move on. Please let me know.
No, I'm sorry. I think we're still
Oh,
facing some difficulty. Why
all
don't
right.
you move on when we're ready with the polls? We'll just let you know if that's okay.
We'll move. Yes.
Sure.
So Manav, back
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah. This is another interior project, but very different from what I just shared earlier. This project is called Obar. It's in Oberoi's, Mumbai. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, here we're suddenly talking about a five-star lounge bar in a five-star hotel, and the entire atmosphere, the mood has to be very different from a raw under construction site. So this is an image that we actually received from the architects
Mm-hmm.
of their intent, a column being covered with a brass tree and most of the interiors being dark. But the final result that we created was actually very different. Of course, there were changes in the materials and all, but our intent was, how do we express the richness of the materials? We have velvet, red velvet on the wall. I mean, velvet itself has it brings an association of richness. The brass reflective tree, again, a very rich material.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we express all of that?
Mhm.
and that was the challenge. And all these brass, the velvet fabric you see, it had these brass strips. So the idea of lighting was to bring out the richness, the little sense of luxury, little glitter, and all those elements that come along with it. Uh, One of the most challenging part here was to light up the tree and also avoid downlights, because the moment we had lights in the ceiling, it takes away the magic of the tree.
Mhm.
So these tiny lights were actually incorporated within the structure of the tree, which would just pick up the tables here. And the one aspect which I think is very important to talk about is the selection of the decorative table lamps.
Mhm.
A lot of time, as interior designers or architects, uh, one of the premise, I would say, one of the premise is to look into what the decorative element looks like, the aesthetics of it. But a table lamp or a floor lamp or any decorative lamp also solves a lighting purpose. It has a lighting function. Here, they were definitely picked up to light up the tree on top. So we needed light that comes, actually has a uplight throw. And this is the light which is actually lighting up the tree. Otherwise, there was no other way of lighting up the tree. So for me, the architectural technical lights and the decorative lights both need to be layered together, thought of together, and they need to come together. It is not two independent layers that the interior designer or the architect takes care of the decorative and the lighting designer comes in and does the technical. Both of them need to complement each other. They need to talk to each other.
Wow, that seems like a great collaboration. I have a question, Mano, over here.
So,
Now, is there, if you were to look at highlighting the textures of material and hence bring about the richness of an interior from that aspect, as well as creating an ambience, which is also the need of the particular lighting design. Do you think that balances, that ever balances, or is that always a struggle?
I would say every project is a challenge and it is a struggle, but it one can balance it out. In fact, I feel, as I said, sometimes photographs don't do justice, but when you're physically there in the space,
Mhm.
I think this project, especially this project, manages to do that. Uh, Bring in, create the. In fact, let me take you to the next slide. Here again, when you are in a larger space, you are in a company, in a public space of about 50 people, 60 people. But when you go there as a smaller group, you want your own intimate uh, zone. You want to create your own space around it. It may not have physical boundaries, but in fact, lighting actually helps that. Without changing the physicality, you can actually change the definition of the space. So for me, the space, this entire project actually creates that ambience. It, of course, lighting up, dealing with the brass tree, the velvet, the fabric, those were challenges. And it was, I think, as you said, the collaboration with the architect, which actually resulted in, helped us come to these kind of solutions. But at the same time, this entire space gives me that cozy, sense of being a very cozy environment, yet being in a public space.
Right.
For me, I think a small project, nevertheless, but I think it had a lot of details to be addressed, a lot of things to be, uh, um, attended to. But yet, everything I think ultimately came together. In
Mhm.
fact, a lot of things were restored from the earlier restaurant which was there. The table that you see in the middle,
Right.
that was part
Yeah.
of the original restaurant. So one actually just
Mhm.
retained that, and we tried to incorporate it within our scheme, in interiors and lighting both.
Right. Okay. So now we are ready with the poll question, Mano. And
Right.
Harshita, let's take poll number two. Okay. If there's an issue, just let us know and we can move on. So, Manav, would you come towards the end of the project to do the lighting in such a case in the project that you're showing? You are involved
Mm,
from the beginning. How is it?
we have, yeah, we ideally we should be involved right from the beginning. Of
Okay.
course, when I say beginning, the basic concept, when the basic architectural interior concept is in place,
Hmm.
that's the time to come in. And whenever we work with daylight, I think we need to come in little when the concept is being evolved.
All right.
So sometimes it's too late to come in, and we've experienced that as well. But ideal time is to come in much earlier.
Right. Sure. This is the time when you're working out the electrical plans, which means you probably have the whole concept almost ready
Absolutely,
and you know where your
absolutely.
lighting fixtures are placed. Okay, we will move
Another,
on.
sure.
Sorry.
So I just want to
Sorry.
Yes,
ask you
I
that.
think we have to. I just spoke to Harshita. She's still facing some issues. I think we should move on.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll carry on till then, till she.
Sure.
One thing I would like to add, because I don't think it's a linear process that the architecture interior concept is ready and then the lighting designer comes on, does his work, and then it goes to the electrical consultant. It is as we were talking, it being a collaborative process. There is a lot of to and fro because we need to understand, the light interacts with materials. The
Hmm.
choice of materials, the finish of the material, the color, the texture, all of that makes a huge difference. Just talking about this brass tree, there were a couple of mock-ups and experiments that were done. A lot of discussion. What is the degree of polish that we should have on this brass tree? There was a discussion on the color of the carpet under the seating
Hmm.
because interior team had their own challenges. I mean, it's a five-star hotel and it's a bar. You will have people spilling food, drinks. So you can't go very light, but at the same time, to create that own, our private, intimate zone, we would have preferred a lighter shade. So there is a lot of push and pull, tug of war that happens, and ultimately, I think that's what brings the project alive when there is this collaboration and everything fits into place. It's like
Right.
solving a jigsaw puzzle.
Hmm. Yes. Manav, we can move on, please.
Sure. Uh, this is a project which is a museum, a gallery. This is in Jaipur City Palace. Uh, Two very interesting aspects of this project. It's a very tiny gallery, but when you come in, enter, and you move through the the spaces, one of the major principal interior intent was to start with all the spaces being black in the beginning, then turning dark gray, lighter gray while we reach here. This corridor was red and white. And this is exactly what, I was just talking about how our eye takes a while to adapt from coming in from a bright outdoor space to a dark space. And, um, and that was the challenge that we faced. How do we address that? And the other challenge that comes in case of a museum is we need to protect the displays. Light can actually damage the objects, the artifacts. So we need to limit uh, the amount of light that actually falls on these objects. So we were stuck between reducing the light to take care of the objects on one hand. On the other hand, we were, okay, how do we increase the intensity of the light and make people comfortable when they enter? So I'm just going to, ultimately what we did was limited our light only to the artifacts, ensuring that they stand out. And that's what actually orients the people to move around. It
Right.
creates a little starkness. Few interesting, important panels were lit from top to bottom. But the idea was also to make the objects look special, like jewels in this gallery. Some of these are objects, like, for example, this book in the center, it's called Chuhanama. It's about 250, 300-year old. So, you know, these are almost like jewel objects.
Right.
So a few more, I'll just go over these just to give you a sense of what the spaces were like. And you can actually see how the black is suddenly turning into gray, and you start to see a little more of the space and the ambient light levels increase.
Mhm.
This is the red tunnel that I was talking about. And this was another big challenge. Again, an example of collaboration with the architect, and how sometimes we do end up getting a very strong brief from the architect or the interior team. All this while we were using spotlights to light up the artworks. But in this gallery, as a disruption, uh, that's where the color also changed from monochromatic to red. The
Mhm.
brief given to us was no spotlights or any light from the ceiling. The only place we were allowed was to have lights in this cove. And again, there was quite a bit of a, you know, push and pull. How do we do that? Because as you can see, the artwork is on the wall. If we need enough light on the wall, it needs to be directed directly to the wall, not reflecting off the surfaces. But at this time, I just want to put up a question. Should we,
Yes.
yeah?
So this is where our poll number 3 comes in. Let's have a look at this. This is going to be exciting. There you are. So, which gray in the center box appears brighter? Okay, all participants, there's the center gray square, and we'd like you to tell us which of these is the brighter one, A or B. Let's see what most participants have to say. All right, so all the participants have pointed out A as the answer. Um, Manav, we'd like to know from you, why have you asked us this question and what is the correct answer?
Okay. In reality, both are the same.
Mhm.
Uh, this is where, again, what comes in is how our eye behaves is very interesting. It's always, this is an illusion actually. And in reality, both are gray, but what makes us perceive the gray box on the left to be brighter is the black context around it. Now, this is a challenge. I mean, this is something, those renders that you were talking about, they're not able to capture. And it's only through eye and, physically seeing it in real life is what makes the difference. Now, this was the challenge that we had to address in this project. I'm coming back to the project now. Now, with this white band working as a cove, a dark surface here, and a dark floor, we always knew we were going to run into this challenge of this band seeming extremely bright. And what we had to do was actually develop a lighting system where this entire curve works like a reflector. Each bump works like a reflector so that the glare from this white surface is minimized to the possible maximum possible limit. And this is what the final result looked like. And for this, we actually had to simulate, test our ideas because it was just impossible to do it, do a physical mock-up at this scale. But we had to do all our calculation and simulate and see what the result of these interventions would be. So again, for me, it's an case in where collaboration with the architect becomes extremely important. And lighting is not about adding one layer to the architecture of the space, but how well you can integrate it within the architectural uh, fabric and how well you can use light to express the architecture.
Right.
And I'm now going to move to this a different kind of a project where we work with daylight. Um, Typically, I mean, this is a residential project, and typically what we've seen as a practice, a lot of people put these timber fins on their facade as a facade elevation treatment. And this is exactly what was happening on this project where we were working with on the interior light. And when we realized this, we spoke to the client and said, please allow us to intervene here because we would like to do a little more with the design of these fins. And what we really wanted to do was, because fins work like jalis. So our idea was to design a jali or a fin system which would maximize my winter sun, because this house is placed in Delhi, and we would like maximum sun to come in during winters, and minimize the summer sun so that we are protected by the heat and the extreme light outside. So that was the premise we were working with. So what we did was actually study the movement of the sun on the facade. The blue rectangles that you see represent the movement during winters, and the red rectangles represent the movement during the um, summers. And what I mean by the movement is basically, if I go back, you see these windows behind the fin. So what we were actually trying to trace was which part of the fin actually affects the light coming in the building through the windows. So these rectangles are actually representing the area on the fin which affects the light that actually filters through the glass. And what we realized and we highlighted, marked out, like for example, this rectangle is that requires the maximum density of fins in summer. And this rectangle actually requires the minimum density of fins in winter to allow the maximum light in. So this is what we actually mapped for each of the openings and the windows for the entire fin. And and the next step was to develop a strategy to control the light. And what we did was something very simple. This was the cross section of the fin that they were working with. And we just started to play with the cross section. The moment and this is the direction of north, the light is coming from here. What we realized was if we chamfer this fin in this direction, this allows the light to go through. If I have only one chamfer, this part blocks the light. And in this case, it's even lesser light that goes through. And in this case, there's no light that goes through at all. So just working with these three cross sections, we developed this, again, a map, and identified which part of the screen we should have what kind of cross section, which was developed further into more of an architectural facade drawing. And it became a nice matrix array of these fins with different cross sections. And ultimately, this is what it started to look like. And some more views of this. So one uniform section was divided into smaller sections of different cross sections of the fins. And the most interesting thing about this was it became dynamic in a not in terms of the movement of the fin, but the view, the way you perceive the facade dependent on the position of the observer and where you viewed it from, the transparency, the opaqueness, and all of that. But yet, I personally felt, uh, it we could contribute a bit to playing. Actually, for me, the idea was how do we connect to the nature? How do we design a film working with the daylight that's happening around us, rather than just being a standard solution to the facade? And somewhere there was this sense of little satisfaction when we were able to actually achieve this. So this is another different kind of a project, not an artificial light, based on artificial light, but more to do with daylight, because that's something that really excites me. So I thought I'll share this with everyone as well.
Right. So this
So
is actually product design, if I may say so, to add on. And I guess a lot of the work that you do in lighting would be requiring some product modification, or perhaps innovating something of a product over there to facilitate your ideas in lighting. Um, so we have a lot of questions lined up for you, Manav, and there are, of course, questions which I'm sure are related to some of the works that you were discussing. So I'm going to put that forward to you. And in case if we are not able to take on all the questions, Manav has promised us that he will help us answer them, and we will be then forwarding those answers to you. But I'll start off with whatever we can handle right now. Okay. Okay. So Vasant has a question. What kind of protocol is used in the fixtures for Amber Fort? Is it Amer
okay,
Fort or
um,
Amber Fort?
yeah, both are
Yes.
correct. Actually, I think
Yeah.
the protocol used over there is DMX, because DMX protocol allows the DMX protocol has the maximum. It works best for theater because the sensitivity of the protocol is the best for those kind of applications.
Mhm.
I mean, do you want? Would you like me to explain what this protocol is a bit
Maybe,
for
yeah,
everyone else?
maybe 1 or 2 points.
Okay. Basically, when we control lights, there are different languages that we need to use to talk to the light. And that's what's called a
Mhm.
protocol. A simple dimmer in our homes is also one kind of protocol, which is manual. But there are 4 or 5 different kinds of protocols, and some of them being digital uh, today. And DMX is one of the digital protocols which we use to control lights. And it's all programmable. So you program the entire thing on a computer or a laptop on a software, and all you need to do is go back and say play, and the lights are all programmed, they can are all timed, so they come on at a specific time, certain specific duration, certain specific intensity, and that's how it's done.
All right. I hope, Vasant, that should help you out. So there's another question from Ashish. How does one approach the execution if it's more experimental, trial and error, or one just goes with a strong plan?
Trial
So
and error,
Manav,
mock-ups.
you have undergone many of these. So
Yeah, I think working with light, I say this very often. You draw 2 lines and you know that's a wall, but you cannot draw a line, you can't represent light on paper. You just can't. And the only way is to actually be at site, see what the light is doing, see how it's behaving, and uh, that's the only way. Of course, this becomes a challenge in case of larger projects where you need to probably rely on your uh, simulation softwares and calculation softwares. But being at site, understanding light, understanding the interaction of light with materials, no software can actually recreate that for you accurately. And I think all the learning happens at site. For me, that's how I've learned. I'm not trained as a lighting designer. I've just learned everything on the job. But for me, that's the way I've learned.
right. So for that, we have some other questions about. Anyway, I'm going to go on with some of the other practical questions or technical questions. Do you simulate light digitally using 3D software? And can you name some design softwares which use, which simulates light on paper, gives an idea about what it does?
My uh, I think my favorite tool is actually Photoshop. It doesn't simulate, but it helps me visualize.
Mhm.
And I find working with software, simulation software, is a little limiting because they tell you what the light is doing. But for me, the first step is to actually visualize what I want. And on Photoshop, what I'm able to do is actually visualize what I'm looking for. And then for me, the next step is to figure out how to do it. So that's one software which I use extensively, or Photoshop or any equivalent Affinity and all of those. But as far as simulation is concerned, 3D Max is a good software which gives you very can give you realistic looking images. As I said, I sometimes doubt the accuracy of those, but in terms of lighting, light levels, and what they finally would look like, but they are very realistic looking images. And then more technical softwares for like calculations, there are a few. One is Dialux, which is fairly common. I think Revit also allows you to work, calculate the light levels. And there are a few more which are not. AGI is another one, which is very
Mhm.
popular. And there are quite a few. There are quite a few which allow you to simulate and calculate the light levels as well.
Right. So there are some people are really asking you personal questions, whether they can join your team as an intern. That's one. Or do you only provide lighting ideas inside a space without being involved in designing the space? Um, Manav, would
I,
you like to?
of course, we would love to have interns. I think
Okay.
we would love to have people over. Uh, but I didn't get the second question.
The
Um,
second question was whether do you do lighting design uh, independently of the project? So, or do you take the project as a whole? Do you ever design
yeah,
without doing the
yeah,
interior
yeah, yeah.
or the architecture?
90, I think, okay, I don't practice architecture anymore. Maybe one or two projects here and there. But
Mhm.
essentially, we are a lighting design practice. We
Oh,
only do lighting design. We don't do architecture anymore.
right. So I hope Balaji, before for the earlier software question, Shivani, I hope you have found your answers. Um, I also have a question about what is the best way to learn lighting design practically. I don't seem to know of many places where this is happening. So could you enlighten us on where it is happening? I do know of short-term courses.
They
So
are
yes,
they,
Manav,
they, are-
go ahead.
they are master level courses in Europe. In Germany, there's an institute called Wismar.
Mhm.
There is, I think in Sweden, there is an institute called KTH. London, you have Bartlett School of Art and Architecture. And then you also have an institute in Sydney, University of Sydney. I mean, these are the ones, prominent ones, which I'm aware of. Uh,
Right.
and But I think there are some in US as well. There is one lighting research center. It's
Hmm.
somewhere near New York. Uh, so that's also there.
Okay, so I'm also happy to announce that JS Institute of Design is commencing with a short-term program in lighting design, where Manav will be teaching, and we are looking forward to um, those who are interested to connect with us, and we would give you information about it. And we are about to start in the month of February, so please do get in touch. So that's at least one of the places where you will find lighting design course. And I would then just one last question about exhibition design. What about lighting in exhibition design? Is it very special? Does it have to be? Uh, is it done always the same way? And do you think there is enough done in exhibition design to really help in the purpose for which it is done?
Are you talking about permanent exhibition, like galleries and museums,
Uh,
or
I would
is
probably
it?
say, I would think exhibition, which is the trade fairs and other promotional events.
I think there is a lot of a major role that lighting plays in a lot of events. But I think trade fair somewhere lacks, the somewhere that opportunity or that that platform potential for lighting to come in is missing in most of the trade fairs. That's what I felt. Though we've also participated, we've been involved with certain uh, exhibitions earlier, but there are a lot of limitations that one is working with. And trade fair at the end of the day is a trade fair. I mean, I don't think one is unless until that space is specifically
Okay. So
designed
I
as a
sorry, Manav.
event.
I'm really
Yeah,
sorry.
sure.
This was not just trade fair exhibitions. This was I got clarification. It is about art galleries,
Of
museums,
course.
exhibits. So yes, if you can explain from that point of view.
Art galleries and museums, the lighting for them is actually very specialized. As I was mentioning, one light for me over there has two roles. One is to ensure that the display is not damaged, because any kind of light, I'm not even talking about the UV and the infrared, but even the visible light which you need to see the object can actually damage the object. So you need to be very careful about how you use it. The other thing is, at the end of the day, you also using light as a communication tool. You want to convey an idea. You want to communicate about the object. You want to display the object in the right light, the way it should be. You know, the ideal scenario for the lighting. So this is what I call actually the dilemma when working on a museum lighting project. And another thing is, which comes into play, is the experience of these galleries, the lighting of the spaces. Because you also, I think museums and galleries are one of the very few places which allow a lighting designer to actually design lighting for the experience. Most of the areas we end up working on are more functional areas. So we need to really focus on the functional aspects of lighting. But that's one potential in galleries, where you can come in, play with a bit of the light, create an experience, create the atmosphere that I've been talking about, and actually engage the visitor in the gallery who comes in there. So I think there is a huge potential, also there's one more important thing to remember. Museums, especially little bigger museums, there is a extreme possibility of museum fatigue, and lighting is one element that can actually help you address that issue. You need to modulate the experience, the highs and lows of light. You need to create that, so that that variety of space, the experience of space is also there. So it's a field in itself, and it requires a complete different attention from other uh, kind of projects.
Right. I think that is a separate webinar by itself, and hopefully at some point in future we may have some opportunity to conduct that. But thank you very much, Manav. If there are any
Thank
more,
you.
there are some more questions which we will forward to you, and we'll
No,
be responding to the individuals. Thank you very much. I think it has given presented some kind of the scope of lighting design, and your projects have given an idea about where all it is applicable, where is it, what all is happening in this field. And of course, your insight has helped them to understand some depth of how it is designed and what are the challenges. So thank you so much, Manav. And we do
you're
want
welcome.
participants to, if you have any further questions, or if you need any further clarification which might have been disrupted due to some reason, please feel free to ask and write to us. We will forward it to Manav to be able to help you with any clarification. So thank you. And thank you, team,
Thank you.
for all your efforts, despite some problems the hitches that we felt today. We look forward to seeing you guys in a fortnight. Bye bye.
Bye bye. See
Bye,
you.
Manav.
Bye.